How can we expect righteousness to prevail if no one is willing to give themselves up individually for a righteous cause? Hans and Sophie Scholl were university students in Nazi Germany during the Second World War. And Hans and his friends, drawn together through their shared love of art, music, literature, philosophy, theology, became disillusioned with Nazi ideology and decided to become political. They wrote pamphlets to turn the public against the Nazis. Adopt passive resistance, they wrote. Block this atheistic war machine before it is too late, before the last city is reduced to a heap of rubble, before the last youth of our nation bleeds to death. They distributed these pamphlets anonymously, signed only as the White Rose, because speaking out against the Nazis was dangerous. On February the 18th, 1943, Hans and Sophie were distributing pamphlets at Ludwig Maximilian University when a janitor loyal to the Nazis spotted them. They were arrested by the Gestapo and 4 days later brought in front of a Nazi court. Sophie said, "Somebody, after all, had to make a start. What we wrote and said is believed by many others. They just don't dare express themselves the way that we did." They were not allowed any testimony or any further defense. They were convicted of treason that day and sentenced to execution a few hours later. Sophie Scholl said, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when hardly anyone is willing to give themselves up individually for a righteous cause?" Such a fine, sunny day, and I have to go. But what does my death matter if through us thousands are awakened and stirred to action? I've had the blessing and privilege of working with so many courageous pro-life university students over the last 15 years as a student activist myself and in my current role supporting pro-life students in campus clubs across Eastern Canada. Now, with abortion, it is preborn children who face the guillotine. But it takes a lot of courage for pro-life students to speak up in defense of the defenseless, as a voice for the voiceless, when being pro-life is unpopular on campus. Students face harassment, discrimination, censorship, theft, and assault, but they speak up anyways because they understand the importance that it's life and death. I think of a student from York University who shared with me that when she became unexpectedly pregnant, it was because of the example of student activists from Toronto Against Abortion that helped to give her the courage to carry that pregnancy through and to become a young student mom. Because she saw the value of human life, because she saw people speaking up to say there's another way to love both baby and mom. I think of my friend Matthew Battista, who's here today, who, as the campus club president at the University of Toronto, faced assault and stood up and defended his club and club status against the student union. And when the federal government put the Canada Summer Jobs abortion attestation in place, he stood up again. He joined Toronto Right to Life, where I serve as a volunteer on the board of directors, and Matthew and I and Toronto Right to Life launched a charter challenge to push back against government infringement on freedom of religion and freedom of expression. But today, I want to invite my friend Talia up in order to share about her experience and the courage, the contagious courage that she's shown as a pro-life student at Ryerson University. Talia, in 2016, as an undergraduate student, you founded the pro-life outreach team at Ryerson, as it then was. That's how we met. You wanted to share the pro-life message with your peers, to change hearts and minds on abortion, to save children's lives, and to spare women the trauma of abortion. And simply because you expressed your pro-life beliefs publicly, you faced harassment and discrimination elsewhere at your school. Can you explain a bit about what happened?
So while I've always been pro-life, it wasn't until I was in university that I really started sharing about this publicly. And because I did so, I faced a lot of harassment and discrimination from my student union on campus. I was denied access to student union services and events, and even though I have a disability, I was told I couldn't access support services for students with disabilities.
So you were denied access to events. You were paying student union fees just like any other student, but you were not allowed to access events and services just like any other student because you shared your pro-life beliefs elsewhere on campus. And this was incredibly difficult personally. One of the events you were denied access to was a healing event for survivors of sexual assault. And as you were processing and trying to seek healing from the experience of being raped, you were denied access to an event because you were pro-life and because you shared your beliefs elsewhere. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. Do you mind sharing a bit about that experience?
So while I was reaching out to others on campus to try to spare women the trauma of abortion, I was also working through the trauma I had experienced in being sexually assaulted. And at the time, our student union offered closed spaces that were just for survivors to be able to gather together and seek healing together in community. So I reached out to ask for help and said, I want to attend this. And I was told that because I shared my pro-life beliefs, even though they knew I wouldn't bring up my pro-life beliefs at this event, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to seek healing. And it has been a lot of years since I was first told that, and I'm very grateful to have to work through a lot of healing in that time. But one of the things that a lot of survivors of sexual assault struggle with, one of the things that I was very actively struggling with at the time, was feeling like we must have done something to deserve this, that what had been done to us was something had to have been our fault in that. And to be told by the people I was told to go to for help, the people who are on campus to support students, that it's not appropriate for me to seek out healing, reinforced all of those fears and questions.
I was heartbroken then. I am heartbroken now. It's so appalling how you were treated. So what did you do about it? You got connected with Carol Crossan, and what did you do in response to that injustice?
So with the help of Carol, I filed a complaint at the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal based on discrimination based on my pro-life creed.
And that was incredibly difficult for you. I mean, first of all, as an undergrad student, to decide whether or not to launch a legal complaint against your university and your student union, never mind the fact that it involved such personal matters as well. So how did you decide what to do?
There's a lot of things I'll be internally grateful to Carol for, and it's so heartbreaking to have this conversation without her here. But one of the things I am most grateful for her for is that throughout all of this, she centered my healing and my safety. One of the things that Carol is very upfront with me is that one of the costs of seeking legal action is that legal cases are public record. And at this time, there were very, very few people in my personal life who knew I had been sexually assaulted. And it wasn't something I could really talk about. And in talking through that with Carol, talking through whether or not to include this in the complaint, One of the questions I had to ask was, would these same student union staff who had replied to my cry for help by saying, it's not appropriate for you to get healing, would they respond to the same way to other survivors, to others who share deeply held beliefs that go against what is popular?
So you had the courage to take a stand despite the intense personal difficulty, because you didn't want other people to face what you had faced. And that initial courage, I mean, this started in 2016, 2017. The litigation's been going on for 5 years, over 5 years. Have you always been confident after that initial decision, or have you had doubts along the way?
I think our audience probably wanted me to say, like, yes, I was always confident, but the honest answer is no. There was lots of times of doubts. About a year ago, we were told by the tribunal that we go to a preliminary hearing, and at the time, I was finishing grad school at Ryerson, I was applying for jobs, and I really, really wanted to just walk away from it all. I wanted to wait with someone else who's better spoken, someone who is in a more stable place in their life, someone who's better prepared to take on this battle. And I reached out to a professor who I knew shared my beliefs, someone I deeply, deeply respect. And I was hoping to hear from her that at a certain point in your career, these fears go away and you have the confidence to do all the things that you believe is right. And instead, she told me that these fears never go away, and we've got to choose what we're going to do with them. And with her encouragement, I went ahead to that hearing, but that still isn't the last time that I faced doubt. I had the opportunity last week to be sharing my pro-life beliefs at Ryerson, and the whole way there, I was thinking, what happens if someone from work, what happens if my boss sees me, and what happens if I face harassment from the student union again when going to campus? And then I got to campus and I asked a girl what she thought about abortion, and she told me, I disagree with it, but I do so quietly because I know it's not a popular belief in my classes. And I realized that I was spending so much time worrying about what would happen if someone saw me. I didn't stop to think about what would happen if no one saw me, and what would happen if more students felt like they're alone and they're the only ones who held these beliefs.
Someone, after all, had to make a start. And the theme is good news in the marketplace, and we have such good news to share. That was last Thursday that you were at Ryerson, and a day later, a ruling came out on that preliminary hearing from the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. And the other side had argued that pro-life beliefs should not be a creed considered under the code, but the tribunal ruled in Talia's favor, and you won, and won in a big way. The tribunal said that your pro-life beliefs, rooted in your Christian faith, count as a creed under the code, that the complaint will proceed and you will get a full hearing. And that precedent has been set, that pro-life beliefs rooted in your Christian faith can trigger the protection of the code. So with such good news and such a big win, how are you feeling now?
Since Carol's passing, I'm thinking a lot about the conversations we had before her death, and I think one of the things she asked me recently is, we hadn't yet gotten a decision, obviously, and she asked me, if 30 years from now, if this fails, will you regret standing up? And I told her then that I can't control what other people do. We can't control how the tribunal rules. What I can control is what I choose to do, and when choosing to love others and face the decision to choose the easy route or choose the right route, I hope in 30 years I'll be able to say that I did everything in my power to love those around me.
I admire your strength and courage and faithfulness so much, Talia. How can we expect righteousness to prevail if there aren't individuals like you willing to be vulnerable and to give up yourselves individually for a righteous cause?
Yeah. Thinking last Thursday when I had a chance to be at Ryerson, I also had a chance to speak to 3 students who were pro-choice who disagreed with me, and One of them asked me, we get asked this a lot on campus, is what happened if I had a bucket of embryos and a newborn infant and I was going to kill one of them, you could only save one, who would you save? I told her, okay, I'll answer your question, but answer one of mine. What would you do if Batman and Wonder Woman were both trapped in a building, and if you didn't save them, they were both going to die? And she said, who would you save? And I said, well, it's not my responsibility. I wouldn't save either of them. And we continued talking, and her friend, who at that point had been very quiet, a little while later asked, well, what if I gave up myself? And we turned to her and asked, like, what are you talking about? She's like, scenario you gave, what if I traded myself for one of them? Then could they both live? And I've been reflecting a lot on that conversation because that is what we're called to do as Christians. We're not called to live a life that's so safe that we never need defending. We're not even called to defend our own rights, even though there's times, Blaise, as you and I have both done, we may need to, in our advocacy for others, take a stand, even to take a legal stand. We're called to do everything in our power to love others, even in a culture that's not receptive to that love. And we're called to see how can we give ourselves up for the good of another person.
Talia, through your contagious courage amidst a culture of death, I think the sun still shines. Thank you.